So Techcello is a cloud-ready multi-tenant application development platform. It is used for building configurable multi-tenant applications, high-quality applications on top of .NET, which you can then depend. And the primary value proposition, as you would already seen, I'm just going to briefly cover this: develop on .NET, deploy anywhere from on-premise to Azure. It is scalable, it is cloud-ready, it is multi-tenant. You get an architecture and engineering blueprint, which all your developers are going to follow, whether it is your own developers or you're outsourcing your development to somebody else. There is the consistency and quality that is maintained because the entire team follows the architectural recipe given by the Techcello framework. It saves anywhere between 30 to 50% depending on the size of the project. If it is a very large project, typically the savings is around 20 to 30%. If it's a smaller project, then the saving could be about 40-50%. The major advantage over the other alternatives in the market is the strategic and technical control that you get over the entire application stack. You have the freedom, flexibility of custom development, but you don't have to build everything ground up. So you have a head start on the various capabilities required for a configurable multi-tenant application, cloud-ready application. You have all of them available as a library of APIs and services, which you install and use during development on Visual Studio, which means your developers can focus only on building the line of business functionalities, and they don't have to reinvent the wheel with respect to all the non-functional requirements and engineering requirements of a typical application like this. One of the important things about Techcello is that we don't only look at multi-tenancy in a purely database-centric approach. It's just not about having a tenant ID in the database. It is also about multi-tenancy at the application layer, the ability to scale the application with the load balancer in terms of using distributed caching and a scalable design. But then apart from all these multi-tenancy at the infrastructure, multi-tenancy at the database, and multi-tenancy at the application layer, which you get automatically when you build on Techcello, which is maturity level 4, you get to build your solution with the highest level of maturity in multi-tenancy. But when you actually deploy it, you may want to mix and match. You may want to deploy a dedicated application instance for one large customer. You may want to have a dedicated database for one country. You might want to have a dedicated box for a government customer, but you can still have a single code base. So the design is for 100% for maturity level 4 level multi-tenancy at all layers of your application, but the deployment can have any combination of maturity levels. And that also includes the ability to configure and customize the application in terms of its views, in terms of its reports, in terms of its business rules and workflows. All these could be configured and customized at the tenant level. That is one of the important requirements of a multi-tenant application. You can't have a homogeneous application and tell all customers that everybody has to use the same application. Customers will ask for some amount of customization and configurability. So how do you do that in a multi-tenant architecture is the bigger challenge than just adding the tenant ID in the database. So that's where really Techcello adds a lot of value. A typical example of application multi-tenancy in the enterprise context, where you could have deployments in multiple regions with a lot of core and common components, but some of the localized components are configurable. We use a metadata-based approach to customizing and configuring tenant level application behavior while still having a single code base. Because physically you are on a scalable cloud, and all these customization and configuration is done at the metadata level or the tenant level. It is stored in the database against each tenant, and so the behavior of the application is automatically modified by the Techcello framework during runtime, depending on the context of the user and the context of the tenant. And the tenant could be a real customer, or the tenant could be a virtual tenant, like Australia could be a virtual tenant. So all the users in Australia will have a different experience of the application because it has been customized for Australia differently, and the metadata is stored for Australia as a tenant in a metadatabase of the framework. So the behavior of the application is different in terms of views and rules and workflows for that particular user's customer in that particular region. Concept of tenant hierarchy in Techcello, which means that there is a concept of parent tenant and a child tenant. So the provider of the application, the owner of the application, is the first tenant created in the system, and then the provider then creates tenants and then child tenants and subtenants, and a child tenant can create subtenants below them. So when you configure privileges, when you configure access control rights, you not only control the access control rights of the end users, you also control what the administrators of a particular tenant can and cannot do with respect to their child tenants. So the whole data, we call as a tenant data scope. So the exposure of data down the line, what the tenants can do, what the tenant administrators can do and cannot do is also controlled, and it flows down. And whenever you create a new child tenant, the configurations and settings of the parent tenant are automatically copied and brought into the configurations and settings, including the custom fields, are propagated to the child tenant. But thereafter, once the child tenant has been created and the child tenant is started, if you change anything at the parent tenant level, it doesn't automatically propagate to the child tenants who are already created. But yes, you can manually propagate them using some scripts, because after all these are metadata stored in the framework database. So if you are making some changes to the parent tenant settings, which you want to propagate to all the child tenants already created, then you could write some backend database scripts to propagate them through the metadata base. But any new tenant created after that will inherit. And the use cases are many, like whether you are trying to build a SaaS product for an ISV, or you're trying to build a private SaaS or a internal SaaS or a multi-tenant solution on .NET for a large enterprise, which would like to deploy it in multiple countries, multiple regions, and you might want to configure and customize the application for different regions and different countries differently using the multi-tenancy concept and configurability concept. But still, the application is being used by the enterprise mostly internally. So even there, we have found customers building applications on .NET for using Techcello. And of course, government SaaS is another application area where multi-tenancy and scalability and configurability is very important for building .NET solutions. And so you could build it on Techcello and host it anywhere from a normal box to Amazon to a PaaS like Azure. Use cases for Techcello is ISPs, BPOs, HROs, KPOs, enterprises, and e-governance. The common threads are a productized non-functional requirement and engineering stack, which you could use not just for one application, but once you license it for a particular customer, the customer can build multiple applications and products on the same stack. And so it means it's a unified engineering stack for multiple products, which drastically reduces your TCO. Okay, and it's again the second important driving force is the configurability of the application at the tenant level, and the scalability and performance using cloud-based technologies, whether it's private cloud or public cloud, and a service-oriented architecture. So these are the reasons why customers use this case study. This is actually a benefit administration system developed on Techcello by a company called Sikova in the USA. They are basically a large HRO, which means that they provide benefit administration services to Fortune 500 clients in the US. They have millions of employee records, 5,000 concurrent users who are using this application platform. So there are multiple layers of users which we have, starting from the backend agents of the Sikova's back